The virtues that are being extolled are dark and backwards and unhealthy and just really bad for people. It's not about the audience anymore.
No.
It's about their self-idolization.
None of these are saying, actually having a wife and 2.5 kids and the white picket fence is a good thing, and that's what you should strive for. And
the winner goes to...
The winner was a Nora, which is about a prostitute, as far as I know. All Zelensky had to do was not say anything and then sign the deal, and his country would be protected. And instead, he couldn't shut up.
The war hasn't ended, and it's not ending. And the enemy, Russia, is slowly but surely gaining more ground. And as the body counts just continue to rise, at what point do we say, we're out?
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Before we start, I want to remind you to check out the PatriotPostShop.com. It's where we sell our merchandise. We've got shirts, hats, books, stickers, all sorts of great stuff. Check that out and purchase something. And that would be great. That would be a material way you can support us and help us improve our podcast and maybe get to the point where we're appearing on other podcasts and having guests on. That's where we'd like to be. But for now, our topic for today is virtue signaling's last gasp. I think it's on its last legs, but it's just had a powerful last little attempt at being relevant over this past weekend. We're recording this on March 3rd, and you should be seeing this episode on March 6th. Yeah. So what just happened last night was the Oscars, of course. And as you know, our opinion of the Oscars is not terribly high. And the other thing that happened that we'll get to is this big blow up between Zelensky and Trump at the White House. And that actually does tie in, we think, to virtue signaling. And we'll get to that at the end. But we're going to start with the Oscars. So, all right, guys, the Oscars happened last night. How excited were you to turn this on and watch every moment of it?
What are you getting so excited about?
I just couldn't wait to turn it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just glued to the TV, you and all the kids.
Yes, absolutely. And I made sure that my kids sat and watched the whole thing.
The whole thing. I watched all the movies that were nominated because they're great, family-friendly adventures.
They're good, uplifting, family-friendly, good for the culture, good for people to watch. Yeah. No.
All of that was lies.
That's lies. Every bit of it.
Yeah. Thomas, how about you? How excited were you to watch these
I
Oscars?
have not been excited for the Oscars in some time. I don't think that I even recalled that they were on last night until maybe they were even done by the time I think.
Well, they go for like 4 hours, so probably
they were probably still going on. No, I actually had absolutely no interest other than finding out after the fact who was it that won basically Best Picture. That would have been really the only thing that I would have had any interest in, and I didn't know what other than the one with the transgender character.
Emilia Perez, yeah.
That was the only one I'd heard anything about going into this. And I didn't realize until today that Dune 2 was actually nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
Well, and, it's funny. I saw a tweet on that whole, on the topic of having not heard of any of these. Mm-hmm. I saw a tweet of this guy who had an Oscar party and he invited a bunch of people over and none of them watched it because they didn't know what anything was.
Yeah.
They hadn't seen any of the movies.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to, on that note, let's read off the list of Best Picture nominees and see. I'm sure our audience will be just as baffled by this list as we are. So we'll dig into what these movies are later, but just the list. Best Picture nominees were Anora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Dune Part 2. Okay, we saw that one. Nickel Boys, The Substance, Wicked. Okay, lots of people saw Wicked. Emilia Perez, Conclave, and I'm Still Here. And of those, I think the only two anyone had heard of was Dune Part 2 and Wicked.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So...
And the winner goes to...
The winner was Anora, which is about a prostitute, as far as I know. I did not watch the movie. I'm not going to watch the movie.
Yeah, I think it's like a prostitute who marries some Russian guy. That's about all I know about it.
But just so you know, we're committing wrongthink by saying that. We haven't gotten the newest standard guide on language because you're supposed to say sex worker. That's not.
Because sex work is real work, Sterling.
Yes, that's what I've been told. I don't believe it.
It is work of some sort.
I mean, it is the world's oldest profession, allegedly, but
yes, not exactly venerable.
Yeah.
Or healthy.
Yeah. No.
So it beat out Emilia Perez,
yes, which is Emilia Perez is about a violent cartel leader in Mexico who's like this evil gangbanger who decides to become a woman. And isn't he brave and wonderful for doing that?
Sounds like a true story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Lots of cartel members end up going trans and cutting bits off. I'm sure they love that.
So is this like so that this cartel member or leader can escape his sins?
Well, yeah. So
changing his identity or something.
I had talked a big game about how I was going to watch this movie, and I've actually known what it was about because a few weeks ago, a month ago, it looked like Emilia Perez was going to sweep the Oscars. It didn't end up doing that. It won a few. And I was like, we need to watch it if we're going to talk about it. I got about 20 minutes in.
Yeah.
And then I was
like
just like
singing in Spanish and that kind of stuff.
Right. Most of the language is in Spanish, so you have to read the subtitles, and the songs are like, they're okay. The ones I listen to.
But isn't it a French film?
Well, what are you then? I'm French. Why do you think I have this outrageous accent, you silly king?
It was made by the French, I guess, but it's set in Mexico, and it's crazy.
Isn't that just such like a highbrow, just high art kind of thing?
Right.
A French film about Mexican transgender cartels.
Yeah. Not just that. So I read the synopsis. So this guy finds this attorney to help him fake his death and then go trans and become this new person, Emilia. And he does that, and then we jump to 4 years later, and he finds a girlfriend. Hang on, I thought you were trans. Shouldn't you be finding a good man? But no, apparently all these trans guys still want to date girls. Isn't that shocking? And then he tries to like get his kids back, which is like, okay, well, if you are a cartel gangbanger, you don't really deserve your kids anyway. But if you pretend you're a woman, you really shouldn't be around your kids. But of course, the movie doesn't present it that way.
Right.
So just, real highbrow, this is exactly what Hollywood should be celebrating.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of the theme here is, and I think we should probably dive into a couple of the others to really flesh out this point that we're trying to make, but it's that the virtues that are being extolled are dark and backwards and unhealthy and just really bad for people.
Yeah. There might be one exception, Nickel Boys. I don't know. Again, didn't watch it, but that one might be a little bit more uplifting. But of the others, so I'll just run down real quick what I know about them. And a lot of this comes from, synopsis or what people are saying online. So Honora is about a sex worker or prostitute. My bad. I'm sorry.
A whore.
Yes. Thank you, Andrew.
See if we can get demonetized.
Right.
How many words
I'm
to get
sure
demonetized?
we've been demonetized already.
Guys, we never got monetized
I don't
to begin
think
with.
we ever were
Correct.
monetized.
Exactly right. So Honora is about a prostitute or a whore. The Brutalist is about an evil capitalist guy who hires this Jewish survivor of a concentration camp. And one thing I know about this movie is that once this Jew escapes Germany and comes to America, the first thing he does, well, as far as the audience knows, his wife is still in the concentration camp, is visit a prostitute.
Oh, that's terrible.
And then the rest of the movie is just a string of just horrible things happening to this guy, and including this evil capitalist who's allegedly this real big macho man raping this guy. It's crazy.
What?
It's crazy. I just know what Matt Walsh has said, so that's where I'm getting this from. But I'm assuming he was telling the truth. I don't think Matt Walsh was lying.
Ugh.
A Complete Unknown, that's about Bob Dylan, so that's a biopic. Okay, maybe that one's
That may be all
That
right.
one would be interesting.
that one's probably worthwhile. I don't really have a problem with that. Conclave, I read the synopsis on this one a few weeks ago. It's about the Pope trying to set up a succession for his next Pope, and I don't remember the details from the synopsis, but basically in the end, turns out the Pope or the new Pope or one of the popes was secretly born a woman all along. And so,
of course,
it's just, they got to subvert everything they possibly can. They can't respect Catholicism. They can't respect the Pope. They can't respect Christianity. They can't respect male, female. They can't respect anything. They only can destroy these things. A Dune Part 2. Okay. We all enjoyed that. I think we rated it pretty highly, but
yes,
the message is not, it's not like Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, where the king comes and he sets all to right and he destroys the evil and there is a new hope for the world with Gondor after the fall of Sauron. That's how Return of the King ends. Dune Part 2 ends with Paul Atreides, who's been horribly betrayed, getting his vengeance, destroying the corrupt regime that destroyed him, and then sets him up to become exactly like them. And in fact, that's what happens if you've read the books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Worse in some ways, but anyhow, it's an interesting story. It's very, I am a big fan, but it's not exactly virtuous and it doesn't promote virtue. Emilia Perez, we talked about that. I'm Still Here. I don't know anything about I'm Still Here. Nickel Boys, that's about a horrible school and the survivors of it and how they overcame that. The Substance, which is about being as young and pretty as a woman as you possibly can and dressing as provocatively as you can. And then what do you do when you get old and you can't do that anymore? And
dedicating your entire life to a career instead of having kids and having a husband and family.
Right. And so the substance is this substance that makes you young and pretty again. And so, that's what that's about.
Yeah. It's a horror film, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I don't know but I mean, there actually could be a lesson in that one that could be positive.
I think that is kind of the lesson you're supposed to take, is that there's more to life than being pretty all the time.
Yeah.
And then Wicked, which is about taking the villain of The Wizard of Oz and telling you why she was never a villain to begin with.
Right.
So none of these are saying, actually having a wife and 2.5 kids and the white picket fence is a good thing. And that's what you should strive for. And actually, Christ is a pretty good aspirational figure and you should be like him. None of these are saying anything like that.
Or even at very least, just showing virtue in general.
Right.
Or, striving or making your mark on the world or trying to do good in the world or even just, I don't know, just being virtuous at all.
And not being miserable all the time.
That's a good point too, is the not being miserable thing, because another theme of this is misery.
Yeah.
And you just see so many examples of darkness and hopelessness and there's no future and people do horrible things.
Yeah.
And that is just, and of course, this is true of the world, but there is hope.
Right.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the focus is on self. And so you're having characters that are selfish, but being kind of celebrated for that, this guy who transitions for whatever reason. That's a selfish move. That's a selfish identity. That's a selfish desire. And, where are the movies that are presenting individuals who are willing to be self-sacrificial, who even to their own harm will ensure that they're doing good to others?
Well, I'll tell you where those movies are. They're all being made by Angel Studios.
Right.
Every single Angel Studios movie has to pass a test with the Angel Studios Guild that says, does this film bring light into the world or not? And if it doesn't, then they don't make the movie.
Yeah. On the contrast, what is the test that has to be passed to get into the Oscar nominations?
Yeah. And the Oscars rules.
Yeah. So there's probably lots of other requirements, but these are the newest ones.
Is this the first year it's been in effect? I think it might be.
Either this year or last year was the first year ever.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It must be this year because Oppenheimer won last year.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think this is the first year, and this is what we get.
Yeah, and I think under these rules, Oppenheimer couldn't have won if it had come out this year.
I believe
That's
you're
an
correct.
interesting note.
Yeah.
So standard A, the film must meet one of these criteria, and I'm just going to try to summarize this because there's multiple possibilities. You either have to have one lead or supporting actor who is underrepresented, basically not a straight white male. Or you have to have 30% of all actors in the movie be not straight white men. Or the main storyline theme or narrative has to center on someone who's not a straight white man.
Wow.
That's my interpretation. They say underrepresented racial or ethnic group,
and
but that's what they mean.
What's wrong with
and hence
straight white men?
Name, I know, right?
Yeah.
Hence the name of the title of our episode, virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Because that's what this is.
Yeah.
And this is what you get when that is your focus. We're going to be virtue signaling. It's not about meritocracy. It's not about what is actually a shining example of the art form.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, can we check all of these boxes for whatever nihilistic reasons?
I mean, if you think about it as if like Auditor had to show up on the sets of these movies, they would be doing a head count like, oh, you're too white. Oh, I don't see enough black people. Sorry, I can't nominate you for anything. Like, how absurd would that be? But that's exactly what this is. There's other criteria that are on these same things. The creative leadership has to be not straight white men, or 6 crew positions have to be not straight white men, or at least 30% of the total crew has to be not straight white men. And then there's another one, the paid apprenticeships, internships, and training opportunities have to be presented to people who are not straight white men. And then finally, this is one where they just have to meet this criterion. The studio or distributor has to have multiple senior executives who are not straight white men.
Why are they so racist?
Why are they so racist?
Yeah, extremely racist.
Yeah.
And just to remind you, like 60% of this country still, or better, depending on who you ask, are white people. So half of those people are going to be men, and the vast majority of those are going to be straight.
Yeah.
So you're automatically excluding the majority of what America can produce just by having these rules.
Yeah, and it's the fallacy of suggesting that only people can only relate to characters that look like them.
Yeah.
And the irony to that is then you're selling yourself short to an audience if you're saying, okay, we have to have more higher percentage of minority. Well, then you're cutting out, if you still follow the logic, you're cutting out 60% potential of your audience.
Yeah.
It doesn't make, it's just foolishness.
It's not, and that just brings me to this point that it's not about the audience anymore.
No.
It's about their self-idolization.
Yeah.
And the self and whatever it is that I don't even know what it is about themselves that they even like.
Well, apparently they don't like all of these movies, I think, end on a hopeless note. Even Emilia Perez, his life is falling apart by the end of the movie. Dune Part 2, it does, like, Paul Atreides is not triumphant and happy at the end of that movie.
Yeah.
None of these people end up happy. There's just, they seem to love misery. I guess misery loves company.
Yeah.
The host was a straight white man as far as I know.
Yeah, that's true.
Conan O'Brien was the host they got for this.
Yeah.
It's just
wow.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That's a little bit dissonant.
Yeah.
I think safe to say Oppenheimer last year, which had like almost exclusively white people, because it was about a real historical event where almost exclusively white people developed the first ever nuclear weapon. That won Best Picture last year, and it would not qualify under those standards we just read you, unless there's lots of people on the crew who are black, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the irony about it is it's actually limiting the ability of studios and storytellers, movie makers to make broad, appealing films or even get creative with films. Because what you're saying is you got to check all these boxes based on race and ethnicity and sexual proclivities or whatever you want to say. If you don't check all these boxes, then your film is going to be out when we're considering the quality of the product that you're producing and the artistic value of it. And it's sad that they've gotten to this point where they've adopted this DEI quota system.
Yeah.
That's because that's what it is.
Well, what they're doing is they're just siloing themselves off from the main cultural conversation even further. I mean, let's look at the list of the 10 nominees for each of the past 5 years, and I'm just going to list the ones I actually know something about. All right, so it's not 10 every year. It looks like it's sometimes less. But in 2020, I know none of these movies. Trial of the Chicago 7, I guess I heard about that, and that's it. I don't know about y'all if y'all can
Yeah, I
read
heard
this.
about that. And that was about the accusations of the jogger, the woman that was raped in Central Park.
I heard.
Okay, is this the one who
Oh, wait,
recanted
no.
just recently?
Yeah. Or what was
Yeah.
it? Trial of what?
The Chicago 7.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's-
it wasn't
that's not that.
not Central Park.
Nomadland, I'd heard of that one.
Nomadland.
Yeah.
All right. So the next year we have ones I know, Don't Look Up, that's about global warming, Dune, West Side Story. And I only know West
And
Side Story from a
I
previous
heard
version.
I heard of Coda, that one, the Best Picture.
Yeah. And I know King Richard because that's Will Smith had just won Best Actor and then he goes up and slaps.
Yeah,
what's his
that
face?
was infamously that. Yeah.
Next year, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I do know that one. That's about, well, I sort of know about it. I remember the trailer. All Quiet on the Western Front. I know that because it's a book. Avatar 2. Okay. Banshees of Inisherin. Thomas and I watched that one, I think, and talked about it. Elvis. Okay, I know Elvis. And then Top Gun Maverick. Okay. 23 was pretty good.
Who was it that acted in Elvis?
Austin Butler, who's the bad guy. He's the one Paul Atreides duels at the end of Dune Part 2.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last year, Oppenheimer, Barbie, and I vaguely know something about Killers of the Flower Moon, and that's it.
Yeah, I watched that. That was a Scorsese film, and I think it was Scorsese. It was, for me, it was boring.
Yeah. Well, I think for general audiences, all of these are boring. That's the point. Like, I'm pretty in tune with movies, and I at least know what movies are happening, even if I don't go see them. And the majority of these movies I had never even heard about.
But this, comparing this list to those previous ones, this list is even...
It's even worse.
Yeah. It's... Yeah. Anyway, the thing that's concerning... Well, maybe not. The point you're making, maybe it doesn't matter. But we've gotten some really good movies from Hollywood, despite its wokeness over the years. But they've leaned so hard into it that if a studio considers maybe taking a risk on a film, and some of them would because they thought, okay, if this gets us an Oscar, it's going to be huge. So let's go ahead and roll the dice on it. Well, you're limiting that even on some stories. Some stories are going to say, oh, that story's too white. Sorry, we're not going to do it.
Right. If you wanted to make a epic retelling of the Norman conquest of England in 1066 with William the Conqueror versus Harold Godwinson, you couldn't do it. It could not qualify for an Oscar because no one in that story is anything but white.
Yeah.
So it's just crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, as far as the Oscars go, you can have them. We don't care.
Yeah. It's virtue signaling. But it's not the only place where we see virtue signaling these days in the world.
Right, exactly. So kind of the big thing everyone was talking about this weekend was there was this really pretty dramatic, maybe the most dramatic thing I've ever seen from inside the White House.
And by the way,
political theater.
Yeah.
if you will.
Based upon the Oscars DEI rules, if someone were to do a story movie about this historical event, it couldn't be considered for the Oscars.
That's a good point. So let's get to the players of this event. The players in this event, well, I'll just outline what happened. Donald Trump invited Volodymyr Zelensky to the White House to sign this mineral rights deal with Ukraine that they'd worked out over the past month and a little bit more.
Well, let's couch it in the understanding of this deal is aimed at trying to bring the war to an end.
Yes.
So it's the first step, hopefully, in like a peace deal, getting Russia to the table and agreeing to end the conflict.
Yeah. It gives Russia a way to save face and hopefully draws them away from China and Iran. And then also it produces a permanent security situation for Ukraine by way of American economic interest, mining, and having American assets, civilians there permanently, thereby barring Russia from ever invading again at pain of World War III.
Right, because they couldn't invade again without specifically attacking basically American economic interests.
Yeah, basically everybody wins with the exception of Ukraine ends up with some lost land and having to suck up some pride, which sucks for them, but the world wins.
The world wins, and frankly, the land they're going to lose, well, they've already lost it. It's not under their control right now. If it was under their control right now, this deal wouldn't lose them any land.
Yeah.
So all the land they control as of the signing of this deal will remain in their control.
Yes.
But instead of that, what happened was there was like 40 minutes leading up to this, and allegedly, I didn't watch the whole 40 minutes, but I've watched clips of most of it. Zelensky was kind of needling Trump and J.D. Vance the whole time a little bit. He showed up not wearing a suit, even though Trump had requested he wear a suit. Zelensky never wears a suit. That's like his brand.
Yeah.
But Trump had asked him to wear a suit.
Yeah. Well, he did tell, caveat, he did tell and promise Ukrainian people he would not till the war was over wear a suit. And it's a lot like what, Churchill did. He came in air raid coveralls to the White House during the Second World War. So it's akin to that.
Well, it's akin to that, except that Ukraine's already gotten tons of aid from the U.S., and they've never actually been our ally to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
And the UK in World War II was one of our strongest allies.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And Churchill was a much better diplomat.
Yeah. The whole clothing thing, I don't really understand why it was a big deal to Trump, considering Zelensky had said he wouldn't wear a suit until peace occurred. But I digress.
Yeah.
It's not a really
the point is that Trump did specifically ask him to do this, and Trump has, is the leader of the nation that is, if anyone is going to get Ukraine's irons out of the fire, it's going to be the U.S.
This is true.
And if I'm the leader of a country that desperately needs the aid of the most powerful person on the planet, I'm going to do everything I can to be on his good side. That's me. So Zelensky shows up. He's kind of needling them throughout the meeting. And then towards the end, when their cameras were on him, J.D. Vance basically makes a comment about, we've tried under Biden banging our chest, talking about how strong we are and how weak Russia is. It hasn't worked. And then Zelensky's like, can I ask you a question? And he starts asking these questions and basically threatening the U.S. He even says, you do not feel now you have this big, wonderful ocean, but soon you will feel the Russian aggression is the assumption here.
Yep.
And Trump blew up at that. He was not having it. All Zelensky had to do was not say anything and then sign the deal and his country would be protected. And instead he couldn't shut up.
He also basically demanded, he changed the terms of the deal live on TV by saying, hey, by the way, we're going to require a security guarantee, AKA we have to get into NATO.
Right.
Which is not part of the deal and it's never going to happen.
Right. And they had worked out this deal already by this point. The deal was written. All they were doing was kind of talking, glad-handing a little bit, and then they were going to sign it. And suddenly he starts trying to renegotiate, which Trump is the negotiator guy. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. This is what he does. So, he knows what you're up to.
Yeah.
So anyhow, JD really kind of jumps in on Zelensky and really lets him have it, and Trump does too. And it ends with them kicking Zelensky out of the White House. They tell him to leave, make him leave. There was a lunch he was supposed to eat. He didn't get to eat it. White House staffers ate it instead.
Yeah. Meanwhile, and also I guess it was the ambassador, the
Ukrainian ambassador.
She's like just sitting there with her head in her hands, just like, it's clear that what Zelensky was doing was a complete disaster.
Well, let's backtrack this whole situation.
Okay, real quick, because I'm trying to get to the main point here. I haven't even gotten to it.
Okay, get the main point, and then we'll go back, because I think this is a point.
So the main point is, after this happened on Friday, over the weekend, all these European countries and Canada have come together and said, we stand with Ukraine. We're willing to put boots on the ground. We're willing to send our troops to Ukraine. We're going to be there. It's despicable the way the U.S. has treated Zelensky and embarrassed him. How dare they? We must boot Russia out of Ukraine entirely, which is not what Trump wants. That's not what Trump is advocating for in the slightest. And they'll say all this, and then they'll usually tack on at the end of the statement, but to do this, we must have the U.S.'s backing.
Yeah.
So they're saying the U.S. basically all this is aimed at the U.S. They're virtue signaling how great they are as long as the U.S. has their back. Like, yeah, I'll go fight that bully as long as my 6'7", 300-pound buddy is right behind me when I do it. It's like, that's not virtue at all.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to this particular incident and why it played out the way it did, I think, is the history. So we're in the third year, or approaching the third year of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Biden administration basic response to it was to support the Ukrainians against the Russians with financial support and military aid and equipment, which we've done to the tune of
187 billion or something.
There's I'm
disparity.
Seeing various numbers. Like 130 is the official number, 115.
I think it's 115.
But a lot of people are saying like 350 billion. I don't know where that number comes from.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that. But let's just say safely about 115 billion. And I think Europe has thrown in another 100 and some billion.
Yeah, all of the other contributions to Ukraine almost equal the American contribution.
Right. So this has been the backdrop, and this is what he's been resting on, and this is what Ukraine has used to fight its war. A war of attrition that they're slowly losing, to be honest.
And there's been ups and downs, but right now Russia is grinding them away.
So the policy has effectively been set by Europe and the previous administration that we're just going to support Ukraine no matter what. That's kind of been, and Zelensky has played into that and constantly kind of been treated almost like a hero everywhere he goes when he goes looking for support from Europe and the United States.
Yeah.
So he comes into the situation here after Trump has been changing the way America is going to handle the situation. That's effectively what is happening. Trump is saying we're not doing things the way the last administration did them. Yeah. Trump is convinced that if he had been in office, Russia would have never attacked. It wouldn't have gotten this far.
I find that credible.
So what Trump is doing now is we need to try to get this bloody war over, and we're just looking at the situation on the ground, and we as Americans aren't going to continue to foot the bill for this thing. Effectively, that's his position.
Yeah.
So before Zelensky comes in, so they, like you said, they had this deal effectively hammered out.
Yeah.
Before Zelensky comes in, he meets with the Democrats. And I think the Democrats saw an opportunity here and pushed Zelensky, press him to change the deal.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bipartisan meeting?
No.
Okay.
So,
well, and the other thing I've heard is that on the flight over, all the European leaders were calling him and talking to him too.
And so I think this is push, but because the leadership in NATO and the leadership from the Democrats in the past administration, they want this policy to continue the way it has been.
Because they enjoy their kickbacks.
Yeah.
I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I would say for some of them, they see it as a just war because the aggressor is Russia, and they think we can't award an aggressor for doing what Russia has done.
Right. And
I
agree with that.
I'm sympathetic to that.
But the problem is they're not our ally. They never were our ally. There was no deal in place where we said, if Russia attacks you, we will support you till you kick them out. There's nothing that exists in that sense. So given the situation on the ground and trying to preserve life and end this war and prevent it from escalating, because when Trump noted we don't want World War III happening, that's a real possibility.
So you're referencing in the conversation with Zelensky,
yes,
Trump really starts to lose his cool on Zelensky because, as he sees it, and as he said it, you're playing with World War III.
Yeah.
You're playing with millions and millions of lives. You're playing with World War III.
Right.
And I think he's right, because the looming threat over all this is that Russia has 7,000 nuclear weapons. And the only comparable power is the U.S. with about 6,000 nuclear weapons. And those numbers vary depending on who you ask. But the fact is, there's only 2 nuclear states with those kinds of numbers. It's the U.S. and it's Russia. Mm-hmm. And if we got into a real war and somebody got trigger happy and pushed the button, we could quite literally destroy all human life on this planet. We have that capability. That's terrifying. We shouldn't want it to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what Trump's concern is here. And I think it blew up the way it did because coming into this meeting, like you said, the public meeting, all it was supposed to be was, handshakes, smiles, and saying, we've come to an agreement effectively, because they theoretically had. This is just happening before the signing.
Yeah.
And it got derailed, obviously, and in such a way that it was, I think, intended to be used politically by the Democrats to undercut Trump and his leadership on the foreign scene, specifically because I think there are European leaders who don't like what Trump is doing, and they don't like the rhetoric, and they got really offended at what J.D. Vance did when he came to Europe and scolded Europe.
Security Conference, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to say it's not the Democrats alone. It's the Democrats and these European leaders working in concert.
Globalists.
It is the globalists. Yeah. It is whatever coalition Joe Biden's administration represented. That's who's fighting back against this.
Yeah. And so I think, though, in spite of all the groaning and moaning and people, upset, offended, at least the media class, I think most Americans are saying this makes sense. I mean, why are we spent X billion and the war hasn't ended and it's not ending, and the enemy, Russia, is slowly but surely gaining more ground. And as the body counts just continue to rise, at what point do we say we're out?
Yeah. So to back that up, I don't have the numbers ready at hand, but I've seen in the past few days, I've seen statistics that say it was something like 70% of Americans on January 20th wanted Trump to end the war in Ukraine. Yeah. So he's got the mandate for that. The numbers, his approval rating has not fallen over the weekend.
No.
The approval for Zelensky within the U.S. has tanked over the weekend. It was at like 70, 80%. Now it's down below 50% for basically the first time since this war started. So I think you're right. The American people agree with Trump's framing of this situation, that Zelensky came in the White House and was disrespectful and basically should have said, yes, please, thank you, save me in my country because you're the only one who can. And instead he was entitled and saying, you need to do more and this is what you have to do and this is why, and basically trying to dictate terms. And Trump was not going to have that.
Yeah, and Trump was exactly right to Zelensky. So you just don't have the cards for this. And, Zelensky tried to play it out like,
I'm not playing cards.
We're not playing cards. And it's like, you're not understanding the metaphor.
Yeah.
Or you're refusing to understand the metaphor. Yeah. The point being, you don't have the power. If you had the power, you wouldn't need to become asking for us for help, to us for help. Mm-hmm. So recognize the dynamics you're working with here. You're facing a new administration. And that's why the ambassador did what she did. Mm-hmm. She recognized the situation, and she recognized what Zelensky just did in blowing it up.
Yep.
And so I think she was just saying this was a disaster, and recognizing that it was a disaster, and recognizing you don't play this way with this new administration, because they don't play this way.
Right. So tying this in with the Oscars, because we said this is all about virtue signaling. So the Oscars, they're virtue signaling by look at all these, sex workers and trans people and black people that we're celebrating, and see, there's no white people at all. Isn't this great? And then this event with Zelensky in the White House is about all these people setting up this kerfuffle to try and make Trump look like a kind of hysterical villain who demands bootlicking, while they are also virtuous and willing to send your sons to go die in Ukraine to defeat Russia. And they're hoping you forget the part about it's your sons they're sending to die. And they're trying to do all this virtue signaling about how they, unlike the US, they're a staunch ally of Ukraine, and they're going to stand by them, and they're going to be there till the bitter end. And then the bit they slip in at the end is always, from everything I've seen so far, the bit they slip in at the end is always, as long as the US backs us up.
Yeah.
So they're trying to bully Trump. And before the new arrangement of things that we've seen since this past November, this might have worked, because you'd have all the media and all the talking heads. And if Twitter was still owned by Jack Dorsey, you'd have Twitter suppressing anyone who said otherwise, and Facebook would be suppressing anyone who said otherwise. But instead, we live in the new era where X is free and you can say what you want.
Yeah. And Zuckerberg has taken his foot off the neck,
yes,
so to speak.
Yes, and even YouTube, someone was telling me this weekend, they're seeing a great improvement in their stats on YouTube, a conservative. And podcasts like this one, obviously not us, we'd like to be, but we're not there yet, are the real influencers, the real ones who let the people know what's going on and what the correct response is about it, or at least what their response is.
They're in the press pool now.
Right. So it's about social media, and it's about podcasts, and it's about real world documentation. I pull my phone out, I video the event happening, then you watch that video and you know as well as I do what happened at that event. You don't need a news anchor to tell you what happened at the end of the day anymore. You can see for yourself. And so these moves they're doing in the Oscars and in Europe are calculated for the old system. And I think under this new system, they're going to fall completely flat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the public is not with them. The question I have with this scenario with Russia and Ukraine and the European leaders, if the deal were to go through, if peace were achieved, why would that be problematic for the European leaders?
Because Putin is going to have achieved his war goal, which is seizing Crimea and parts of Russia.
But does that matter?
Or, Ukraine.
Does that matter?
It matters to them because they've painted Putin as this horrible Stalin-esque figure.
Yeah,
it's not completely inaccurate.
In their mind.
I think there's more nefarious reasons.
Oh, I agree. I think so. A lot of these leaders.
I think there's a lot of money that's being moved around, and they don't want to stop that money train.
There's money. I think there's also typically leaders who are engaged in a war do better in elections. And all these leaders in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the UK, in Canada are all, they're teetering on the edge of being completely overthrown and their entire regime being blown to smithereens by various parties in their own countries. You've got Reform in the UK. You've got, I think, AFD in Germany. You've got whatever they're called in France. I can't remember the name. You've got
Le Pen's group.
You've got Pierre Poilievre, who's all set to take over the prime ministership of Canada. And so I think all these leaders, Trudeau and Macron and whoever the leader of Germany is, and Keir Starmer, are all thinking, hey, this is a great way to not lose the election.
Yeah, I guess you're like you're saying, this is their virtue signal to their constituents that they're on the right side of history on this issue, because Russia's the big baddie, and if we don't fight Russia, inevitably Russia's coming for us.
Yeah.
In the meantime, it's a cash cow.
Yeah.
I can't think. Now, to all of them, not necessarily, but, when Zelensky said effectively roughly half of the 100 billion that we've given him is unaccounted for.
Yeah.
I mean, that should be troubling to Americans.
Yeah. Not to mention that, America has all sorts of problems with actually developing weapons and munitions and stuff, and we don't need to dig into all that. But there's good reason for America to say, okay, we need a minute to actually restock ourselves and focus on ourselves. Like, that is a completely reasonable thing for America to do. And all these European powers are like, no, we're entitled to your power helping protect us. You are actually responsible for enforcing the borders of my country.
Well, in so long as they're members of NATO, and their own protection because of that alliance applies primarily to NATO. Applies to NATO countries, of which Ukraine is not, nor has it ever been. Yeah. And so when you're talking about we need to ensure that the biggest, baddest defender of NATO remains the biggest, baddest defender, you might want to think, maybe giving all this and calling on them to give away so much of their munitions and armor and all this other stuff to help Ukraine fight and deplete their resources isn't a great idea.
Yeah, maybe we should give them a minute. Maybe we should step up to the plate, carry some of our weight so they can recover and lead us into the next age, which the U.S. totally could if it's given the chance, and Trump's trying to do that.
Well, and the thing, too, is if Trump is able to, and I'm not convinced this deal isn't off the table, honestly. Yeah. I think in the end, I think Zelensky might come back, although I just saw today.
He will.
I just saw today that the Trump administration has said the only way he comes back first is he issues a public apology. So he's going to have to eat some humble pie.
Yeah, let me find the quote Trump said at the end of that meeting. He said, "I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage. I want peace." So, and then later he said, well, I've lost it, but he said Zelensky's welcome to come back when he wants peace, when he's ready for peace.
Yeah, he's obviously, but they just said he's got to issue that public apology because he's got to recognize the situation, and the apology, I think, is warranted. You presented a scenario, you were presented with this opportunity, and everyone's expectation of you going into it was that we were just going to, thank each other and praise each other and then shake hands and it's a done deal. And you came in and turned the tables. So what trust do they have that you're not going to try a similar stunt like that again? So I think there's still a possibility. The thing about it is if you get Russia to agree to this deal, Putin effectively, because that's what it is, for the next at least 4 years, Putin's not going to move against anybody.
Right. The only U.S. president in this millennium so far that Putin didn't try to take his neighbor's land under was Donald Trump in his first term. So to be clear, under George W. Bush, Putin went into Georgia and took land from Georgia. Under Barack Obama, Putin went into Ukraine and took the Crimea and the Donbass, or not the Crimea. Did he? Yeah, he did. Crimea and the Donbass, which is most of what Ukraine is going to be losing after this deal. It's just going to be an acknowledgement of the truth.
It was part of the Donbass. It wasn't.
Yeah. And then under Trump, nothing. And then under Biden, this whole Ukraine-Russia war started. So, if you're looking at the scoreboard, there's one person who's shown that he can keep Putin in check, and it's Donald Trump. And they're all saying, no, Donald Trump can't keep him in check. Donald Trump is giving him everything he wants. We can keep him in check, even though they've all failed at it.
Yep.
All right. You got a last thought, Thomas?
Don't virtue signal if you can't back it up. That's going to make myself, if you don't have the goods, don't play like you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have a good reason to virtue signaling. Mm-hmm. And
How about don't virtue signal and just be virtuous?
Right.
You know what? There you go.
Yeah. It's like an old maxim, the people who are actually good don't have to tell you they're good. Like someone who walks up and says, "Hey, I'm a good guy." You're like, "Ooh, I think you might not be a good guy."
Yeah. Yeah. Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah. All right. So that's the Oscars and this kind of geopolitical situation kerfuffle that's going on right now. Yeah. And the
both different forms of theater, by the way.
Different forms of theater. That is exactly right, Andrew. And what we see is that this is the last effort by the old regimes to use the tools that worked under the old regime. And it's not the old regime anymore. And they're going to have to learn that lesson sooner rather than later.
Yep.
All right. That's all for today. This is the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew. We are brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right, and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe to that. And for the podcast, for the Pop Culture Contrarian, like and subscribe on whichever platform you find your podcasts. Hit the bell on YouTube so you know when a video is uploaded. And leave us a comment. Tell us what you'd like to see us talk about, and we'll probably talk about it. We've done it before. And that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.